Hello. Okay, I thought I would make a video on this war going on in Russia and Ukraine for several reasons. We're not going to dive too much into the actual war because no one really seems to be reporting on it. I'm going to discuss with you some kind of what I think are actually the hidden factors in this war, to do with geopolitics and to do with culture and Western culture and all sorts of issues kind of related to that. And yes, I will show you a bit about what's actually going on. So it's just like an interesting thing. So I think firstly, I mean, it's so multi-layered, and this whole conversation is so nuanced and complex. It's kind of quite unbelievable. But I thought I'd show you a few things. So the first thing that's obvious is, like, no one really wants to talk about it. It's not on the news, really. The Western media, when you try and actually find out what's going on, you get a certain narrative. So I want to explain to you what I think is going on, what is actually going on, which no one wants to tell you, which is quite scary. I just said no one wants to tell you, so it's like propaganda. I mean, the Russians you know, it's funny actually what I know Russian propaganda, because I actually know the kind of propaganda the Russians do, which is proper Russian propaganda, and it's quite clever. From a certain perspective, it is quite funny. So, for example, they did a fake of one of the generals criticising one of these fake videos where you mock someone up and you narrate a voice, and it looks kind of deep fake, they call it, don't they? So the Russians have done a bit of propaganda on the Ukrainians by doing deep fake of one of the, I think it's actually the senior Ukrainian general criticising Zelensky. It's like, you can see it from both sides, but from a certain side it's quite funny if you watch it. The sort of stuff we claim is propaganda, not so sure. Kind of, yeah, some of it, but not really. The rest of it, no, not really. If it is, it's no worse than the Ukrainians are doing it, and that's one of the facets actually of this war. It's like the Ukrainian propaganda is immense. So I don't really know where we're going with this. Just thought I'd do a video. It's probably going to be about an hour long. It is what it is. I will try and break down in the description below kind of what I'm covering, and when. So let's start with my favourites. One of my topical favourites at the moment, which is the BBC's coverage of anything. So if you put Russia-Ukraine war into Google, other search engines are available. I mean, so first point, and this is kind of what I'm getting at. You'll see what I mean. So first point here, is this algorithm tweaked somehow? Let's just kind of see what they're saying. Putin scales back attacks. This is a news feed. Al Jazeera, key events. Families of Russian troops protest Ukraine war. That wouldn't seem to me to be a particularly important video for such a generic search. So if you don't understand generic, I mean Google. I'm saying to Google, show me everything you got on the Russia-Ukraine war. I'm not putting in protest or Russian troops protest. At a glance, it's all kind of average. Russia scaling back assault. Putin scales back. So the question is, like, we do this every day. Is this actually telling us what's actually going on? War in Ukraine. Okay, that's the first sort of more. I mean, what would you call this? More pro-Russian than pro-Ukrainian, if you put it that way. So what's it saying? Is it saying something that's good for Russia or good for Ukraine? That's the first thing we're seeing, good for Russia. That's not a piece of Western propaganda, as some would say. Military dips. It's not really telling us a lot, is it? Let's change it. So already we're seeing a narrative appear just in the search results. Truce, keep fighting. Attacks continuing Gaza, so that's actually about the battle. That's kind of what we're more looking to see. History of the conflict explained, milestones. It's not too bad, actually. Again, quite generic. What should we do? Right, this is a good tactic. It's not a tactic actually. It's a search query. You can put a site in. So I can put BBC. Got to put the full site in. You can put anything you want. So you can put sport. The Crusher. Right. So I have not done that right. So you've got to get this right. So what you need to do is get it right and put site, and then it limits the search query, which is Crusher. So watch for typos. There you go. And that's only from the BBC. So this is the kind of Google results. That's from the news feed. Right, so these are only from the BBC. Russia feels sorry. Fencer, Olga Carlin. So it's a mixture of. See, it's only from the sports site. So that's. I did that on purpose to show you. So we've got the same. So basically, if you don't know it, there are different types of searches. This is my business, by the way. This is what I do or did for a living. I stopped doing it. But that was what we call generic search results. They're just like that. So they're taking feeds and other things. So that's a news feed from official news sources. For context, that's something else, taking it for something else. Similar to news feeds, but this is generic. And as we said just the BBC website. Russians fighting for Ukraine. Possible. Swing rivers and faking illness to escape Ukraine's wrath. That's negative, but not about the war. Russia goes back to prisons to feed its war machine. Negative about Russia. Marines gain riverbank. Very pro-Ukrainian. Actually saying something about what's going on. Divka clings on amid Russian assaults. That's actually pro-Russian. And it's trying to use the right language, so it's not pro-Russian, but it's a good result for Russia, but it's a bit, I know that's not true, it's too vague, it's not actually telling you what's going on. Russia executing own retreating forces. So this, compared to what we were doing before, is a limit of the results. So Kiev troop build up reported across Dnipro River. You can just go on and on. It seems to me to be so we got a question about the algorithm, and this is a question about just the BBC's reporting. Seems quite biased. in some ways to certain things, and doesn't actually want to tell you what's going on the battlefield, which is probably what you want to do, isn't it? It's this whole question about the role the media plays in society, which is played forever in terms of freedoms and restraints. And we kind of all know what's going on in the media culture today, with the messaging and the cancel culture, and this affects social media as well. So the question and the point really is, it's about this war, but the more general question is, what role are the media playing in directing the narrative and not showing us what's actually going on, what's actually true, rather than just false. And you can see it across different examples. So this is just one example. I'm not saying this would answer that question, but it gives you some insight into that answer, certainly to do with the war. So my point would be entirely ignore what we call media. You want to go to independent media, and that can only be found really in terms of visuals on YouTube. So this, for example, would be so I guess I could get accused of so many different things. What I'm telling you to do, so I guess this is the thing I should be criticised for, is to go to different sources and make up your own mind. And it's pretty simple, actually. And that's the beauty of it. Independent media versus standard media, or kind of the media culture. So you got this messaging issue just removed. And if you want right-wing media, you go to right-wing independent media. If you want left-wing, you go to left-wing. I mean, there are different things here. So there's redacted, which is mixed. Some of it's brilliant, some of it's bad, and if not worse than standard media. So this guy's actually, so this is a good source, Military Summary Channel. He's Belarusian, does 2 updates per day with videos of actually what's going on the battlefront. This is kind of stuff we actually want to know, isn't it? What bias does he take? Well, this Belarusian, I know, obviously has some bias. No one has no biases, okay? But it's a useful form of an alternative source. That's really what I'm saying. And then if you like the alternative source, you'll use it as a more than just alternative source. I go on this regularly just to check what's actually going on, because no one in the BBC wants to tell me, and I don't trust other narratives. So let's go to, I mean, this is typical. So let's actually find some search results we want to actually look at. We want to find out, because the whole point is, okay, it's a war, who's winning the war? Out of who's winning the war, where's the war being fought? Let's see some of, the warfare. Let's have a report on what's going on the ground. So if you compare this to what's going on in Gaza, you'll notice, okay, it's like, it's not quite polar, but it is polar. In some ways it's a polar opposite towards not reporting on what we want to see in the Israel-Palestinian conflict, and actually not having much in the way of news at all. So when do you ever see Ukraine war actually on the news, on the BBC, on Channel 1 or Channel 2, or even on BBC News? I mean, you'd think it would be BBC News, there'd be the odd thing every now and then, at least, if it's that important, which is what we're being told. That's part of the message. This is a really important war for the West battle against Russia, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, in that case, why don't you showing us more? What is it you're not showing us? What is it you're not telling us? So let's kind of see what the BBC, let's narrow down. So I've showed you there are alternative things. Oh, we've got a breakthrough. Ukraine claims foothold across the river. Okay. So that's a Ukrainian breakthrough. Great. Why aren't you showing us the Russian breakthroughs? It's all very confusing. If you just rely on the media, you'll just end up confused. As I often say in my videos, confusion leads to paralysis, paralysis leads to chaos, chaos leads to the whole world falling apart, and that's what's happening. And that's what we're going to continue to see happening, would be my theory. So you can see there's some maps. But my blunt point is, none of this makes sense. Really, when you try and put some common sense and add the bits you do know. So what do we know? So we're told a lot of things. We'll come back to this. So, but the basis point is that one country is invaded another. There's some nuances we're not being told, which we'll cover in a bit, to do with the weather and the land. Actually look at the land, go, okay, we're beginning to understand the nature of this warfare now and this battle, which we haven't been told. Why haven't we been told it? What we understand is, so the weather's a big influence, because in the winter it's freezing and it snows, and you try marching an army or a military of any sort, massive, anything bigger than a few people, on boggy roads which are not tarmacked, which we'll see is Ukraine, particularly the rural areas of Ukraine, which is where the battlefront is. That war's going to get nowhere. You're going to have bogged down troops, you're going to have bogged down tanks, and actually, because it's already turning to winter, that's happening already. I've seen some stuff today and yesterday from this guy. He's showing pictures from social media of the battlefront, and look, snow. Yeah, it's been snowing. Do you think snow makes a good battle? No. So that's an issue. So the narrative this year is, we all know, West came out, said we're giving you all this stuff, as in tanks, weapons, this, that, whatever, but lots of stuff. Don't really need to understand what the stuff is, but we understand lots and lots of tanks, and ammunition, and the hundreds of billions, not millions, hundreds of billions that we've given, and the hundreds of billions actually the Americans have given to Ukraine to fight the war on its behalf. So what you actually understand is it's a proxy war, so that's interesting. So we talked about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. What is critical actually to understand about both wars is their proxy wars. So proxy means you're having someone else fight on your behalf. So America's getting dragged by choice or not by choice into both. By choice in Ukraine, not particularly out of choice into this Palestinian Israeli conflict. Some new channels would debate that in terms of the wider conflict in Iran. Who wants a war with Iran? I think there's something in that, but no, not really. Don't want to get dragged into it. It's a more of a overarching, okay, what's going on. So what's actually going on in the Middle East is Iran's fighting proxy wars in different areas. So you've got Iran, you've got proxy forces in Iraq. The guy who Trump blew up in Baghdad, which is the capital of Iraq. You know, at the time, fairly big news, but no one said, "Oh, what's one of the chief military dudes in Iran doing in Iraq?" You know, these guys have got proxy forces everywhere. They've got them in Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen. So that's 4, and Palestine. That's 5. No one wants to see the Iranians getting a bigger grip on the Middle East than they already have. They already think they've got a big grip. So America really is fighting against Iranian proxy forces, and then it is supporting Ukraine. So it is the proxy. Ukraine's the proxy for the West. So you've got both sides. I mean, you can make of that what you want, but certainly it's interesting from a kind of geopolitical point of view, because America and the West, particularly America, is fighting on one side in one war and against the defense of the other side in another war against the proxy forces. It's not funding the proxy forces. So it's two kind of geopolitical battles where it finds itself on either side. That's kind of interesting thing. Because fighting a proxy war generally, geopolitically, is not a great idea. It's not how you do diplomacy. It's certainly not how you do geopolitics. Because you're going to end up upsetting a lot of people in a lot of different areas. So the funny thing is, ends up the things the Russians go boo boo. The things that Americans and the West goes boo boo Russia at is the things that the Iranians are doing to them in this conflict. Having to play both sides. This kind of if you want to put it down to right or wrong, though, it's more black. It's not quite as black and white as that. It's trying to fight the evil side on one war and the good side on another, which is kind of strange, really. So that's a really interesting thing. So the point we're making, which we're going to get back to, is like they're not reporting on anything, which is good, and nothing good's happening. And actually, the point we said is, what is really going on? Forget the narrative. So we've got the proxy wars, the nature of both wars, which is very important to determine. It's probably the most important single geopolitical issue in this whole idea of geopolitics and warfare. The second is, this year we send the West and the Americans send loads of NATO, really it is NATO, send loads of equipment to the Ukrainians to fight on NATO's behalf against the Russians, because it suits their geopolitics. And again, they're getting their geopolitics potentially right in one area and completely wrong in the other, or wrong or right or whatever. But it's an interesting scenario, as we said. So the idea is we're giving this stuff to them, like probably thousands of billions, not millions, thousands of billions of pounds in all, and equipment to fight and push the Russians off. So why do they not want to report? Because obviously that's not happening. The narrative of the war has failed. The war has failed, according to the narrative that we were told. And if they reported on it properly, you would understand that, which is why they're not reporting on it properly. So half of this video is to inform you, to give you some insight, and to show you where the insight is. So yeah, go on places like this. There are other different. So yeah, have a look around. What was I going to show you? So if you do the same search, you get the same narrative. Ukrainian forces destroy Russian personnel carrier. Ukrainian soldiers fight off Russian attack. Finnish volunteers target Russian soldiers. Is Ukraine about to score a war-winning victory versus Russia? That's just a complete joke. unsuccessful. Well, I mean, that's the first negative. Successful families of Russian. It's all very pro-Ukrainian. It's very anti-Russian. It makes you think just from this, looking at the narrative, that the Ukrainians are winning, and we know they're not because we don't see it reported on the news. So even YouTube's algorithms are totally biased to reporting the narrative. So if you ask the question, is there a narrative that we're being spoon-fed, the answer would be yes, it appears that there is so. So what you need to do you can just say that again. It's just the same thing. So type into Google map. So you actually, there's plenty of maps to go and choose from. War mappers on Twitter. So I'm going to direct you to. So this is a Western, the Institute for Study of War, and this is Deep State Map. And there'll be others. So this is a Western, and that's a Ukrainian. So we're not even going to Russian-based war maps. So let's have a look. So the question then is, okay, if we understand this war is about pushing the Russians out of Ukraine. This is a deep state map, by the way. Have they succeeded? So this is the current war map. According to that, no, they've completely failed. And this is the other one. So basically, it doesn't really matter what map you're seeing. They're basically showing you the same area with a few nuances. But you can see the Russians have not been pushed back, and there are reasons for that. So I think they've changed this. Okay. So what am I saying to you? Don't go to classic media channels, because they'll just spin you what they want to do. The left channels will spin you the leftist rubbish, and the right channels will spin you the rightist rubbish. Supposing in America, no one's got any dissent really against this war, and it's only popping up now. So in my mind, obviously, I don't want to be cruel to Americans, but they've just lost the plot with this war. Completely lost the plot. No one's saying anything about what's actually going on. And that's bad, because obviously they're supposed to be the most powerful people. So here we go. Similar. So these are slightly complex, but you basically get a basis for going, okay, this is Russian held, this is not Russian held, this is Russian held or Ukrainian held, and it wasn't. So what have we got? So we've got the basic stuff. So you've got Crimea, isn't it? And then the breakaway republics of Ludansk, isn't it? Or something on Donetsk. So this is pre-war. Then the Reds, current. It's a claimed Russian. Ukraine territorial gain. So this is what we're after, the blue stuff. Okay, so let's see how well, because we basically said the Ukrainians had totally failed. So you saw on the BBC this. Is that overreact? It's a bit too query claimed Russian territory in Ukraine. Now the funny thing I think about all this is like it's so confusing. You can go, oh, they're confused. Isn't this claimed Russian territory in Ukraine? Isn't this part of Ukraine? Isn't this claimed territory? Why isn't this in orange? I think it means claimed by the Russians. Ah, okay. So a little bit there. So I don't know if you thought that's one of the things the BBC are highlighting about the war. So that's the most important thing. Aha, look. The Ukrainians have got some territory. Not a lot. Okay. Let's just presume they're right. Okay. The classic. So this is Robotna. We'll look at Robotna. You can just do it at your own leisure, basically. But as you can see, it's not looking great. I mean, how many bits of 3, 4, 5, 6 tiny snippets of Ukrainian land regained by the Ukrainians? So the question is, and again, this isn't about particularly telling you how it is. It's questioning how it isn't more than is, and it's not great, is it really? It gives you the impression, if you ask the question, have they succeeded in the goal? And the answer before is no, completely not. Yeah, they're like the progress is virtually non-existent. So WTF is going on. Why isn't this explained to us? Why isn't this in the Western media? And then the opposite thing. Okay, well, actually, the Russians are gaining control. Like the Western maps. So we've got 1, 2, 3. So you can see little bits. Oh. I mean, that looks pretty bad, doesn't it? So it's another Bakhmut. I mean, it's ironic. Bakhmut was the only thing they'd admit to, which was negative for the messaging, because it was obvious that the Russians took an entire city. It's like you can't hide the fact they've taken an entire city, because someone else is going to go, okay, you've got this area here. I mean, look. So Adivka, this is really important because it's right next to Donetsk. This is apparently the most heavily manned, as in Ukrainian presence, on the front line across the whole of this battle. This is where most of the Ukrainians are, more than anywhere else. So 9 total, like, say there were 1 million Ukrainians soldiers on the battlefront. I'm not saying there are 500,000 here, but it's the heaviest presence. And why? Because you've got Donetsk. So the Ukrainians are close to Donetsk, which is one of these breakaway republics, Russian breakaway republics, capitals. Like, it's a bit of a problem having Ukrainians right there. Because they can shoot things. It's not like they can throw a rock across a river, but they can shoot mortars on the battlefront. That's the line, whichever line you think they've got. Or they can put tanks shooting into this area, or fire missiles, or send drones. There's a lot here the Russians can't do in Donetsk because they're too close to the front line. So if the Ukrainians lose Avdiivka, which they will eventually, you can see the Russians have got them encircled and they are advancing. in several ways. Now, if we were to go through this, it would be more complex than that. I mean, I can basically explain to you what's gone on. So the Russians having lots of problems down here because of minefields. You go into a minefield, you blow up. So they're sort of not had a great deal of success pushing north here. They've not had a great deal of success here. So what they did is there's like a what they call the telecom, which is like a rubbish waste dump. So it's become a hill basically here, and they just sent a whole bunch of tanks around here to get this area and to claim this, which they've claimed. So this overlooks the whole of Avdiivka for miles, and the whole area. You can probably see around here and here. And you can see after they've done that, they've been able to push quite far in different directions. So what you've got here from the Ukrainian side is, again, okay, this is the battlefront. This is where we've got to stop. Because once they get into the grey areas, I mean, that looks bad actually, but that's not too bad. Because this is open country. I mean, you can probably see, we'll probably go through it on Google Maps, but you can see as soon as the Russians get a large part of Avdiivka, whatever it's called. I mean, I've heard its name pronounced so many times, it's ridiculous. Avdiivka, I think, is the right. The whole thing's just going to fall. So, you know, you can see the Russians are really close. So the Ukrainians had to put the reserves and their forces mostly into defending the north because that's a danger. So what's happening is the south's now collapsed. This area here, particularly south, the Russians have broken through. And you can imagine, if they keep breaking through, other areas will be. So basically, if the Russians can keep going north here, this bit under here is just going to go. It's just like common sense. So Avdiivka is a matter of when, not if. So, as I said, some of these factors, like this is a big city on the front line. It's really important strategically. There's a lot of fighting going on. Yeah, you don't hear it on the news at all. And again, as compared to what's going on in Gaza Strip, you have daily. We have reports inside hospitals. We have reports on this, reports on that. I mean, if you compare the two, it's ridiculous. You can't compare. It's polar opposite. Obviously, it's not completely, not everything that's going on in Gaza, because it's a war. But we're getting a whole bunch of stuff. We're getting updates from doctors and hospitals. You're like, the excuses you'd make for not reporting on certain things don't fly because they've been reported in the other war. It's kind of ridiculous. So that's one. I mean, basically the whole point is you can see it's not going well at all. So let's go to this deep state map. Let me just check the time. I mean, it's got different things. So this is a heat map of troops, Russian troops. I mean, again, there are certain things they're not saying in all these maps, like the actual territory grants the Russians, the directions they're being attacked from. So you can see the actual directions now. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's probably about a dozen there at least. So probably 21 different directions the Russians are attacking in. You wouldn't think so by watching the news, would you? That's kind of crazy. And this is a Ukrainian-based war map. You can see the UA and the Ukrainian flag. And you can see we covered Robotna. So where we've got the one on the west near the river, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 attacks. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So we've got 25 different attacks from the Russians in however many days this week, let's say. That's like that's something you'd want to know, want the BBC, for example, to be reporting on. And again, just so like, yeah, as we said, these all have their biases. So let's see what this one's saying. So basically the same thing. So you won't understand it. So Stepova and Baderchi. So in this one, this, although claimed, it's not being shown. It's actually, there's a railway line here, and there are all sorts of different things going on, but you can see basically the same narrative from one map is the same narrative of the other map. So again, the Russians send loads of troops and vehicles to capture this area and to get this hill. So it's basically a complete strategical advantage to this railway line, and are pushing in different directions. So first push here, this has been defended fairly well by the Ukrainians, but they're having to send more and more troops from other areas. This is the area here where they are minefields, so not a lot of success for obvious reasons, but this is where they pushed into. You can't really see the city. I mean, that's it. So this grey area, I mean, it's not clear. It's the actual city outline. It's not too easy to see. You can see open fields, water, all sorts of things. So what particularly the Russians are trying to do is, you can imagine the lines would be across. If they breach a line, then that whole line will become entirely pointless, because they can just encircle it and surround it and capture the troops. Troops would have to surrender, there'd be no way out. So then you'd have to look at the roads. So what probably is going to happen is, before this is actually captured by the Russians, the Ukrainians will do a strategical withdrawal so their forces don't get captured, and then the Russians just come and take the land. So that's one thing. Let's go into, where should we go? So actually, let's look at this. Let's look at these titles. For you, when is this? A month ago. Videos. The full. Ugh. I mean, some of the things being reported in these videos, just like, that would be quite good to put on the BBC or ITV or Sky or ABC or NSBC, but they just don't want to. So it's completely opposite. So okay, again, we're not saying these aren't biased, but we're getting different stories. The Ukraine desertion, a large number of Russian tanks, and so that's the same place. Armenia betrayed Russia and sends weapons to Ukraine. I mean, that's a very neutral, pro-Ukrainian thing. That sounds interesting. We've not heard of that. The fall without Western support, the lack of Western support. Ukraine mobilises boys. Zelensky's going to remove generals he dislikes. It's getting a bit political. I mean, all this is interesting stuff. Russia plan for winter complete collapse. Russian storm Avdiivka. The full. It's just like a complete different narrative. Um, um, so what's interesting is if you actually go to Google Maps, and you pick whatever military map you want, and you compare what's going on the military map with the actual terrain. So let's circle down on a few things in no particular order. So we're gonna look at Robotna because that's widely reported. It's about the only thing that's been reported in the since the spring offensive. We're gonna look at Kherson, and we're gonna look at Avdiivka in more detail. So the first thing's actually to say, let's go to Robotna because this explains things very well. So if we just continue the river around, get rid of this. Right. So what do you actually see? So I can tell you what you actually see, and you might have picked. So these are all the place names. There doesn't seem to be a lot of them. This looks like fields because guess what? It is fields, and these look like major roads because guess what? These are major roads. So we're not seeing big cities. We're seeing fields. We're seeing not so many places. So because we're seeing fields, and then we're seeing not many major roads. So that entirely dictates the nature of the war. So one of the primary issues with the battlefront and the actual war is logistics. So here's Robotna. This was the town taken. So why are we looking at this? Well, if we go to the BBC website, type in Robotna. I'm just doing it manually. So let's look at the article on the BBC. Ukraine gains. Right, so we've got 3 articles perceivably about Robotna. 3rd of August, 3rd of September, 2nd of September. Let's just go through them one by one. Ukraine gains on southern front could open way to Crimea, says Kiev. Recent gains. Ukraine seeks to cut the land corridor to Crimea, which is just a joke. Blah de blah de blah. I mean, just go through and read it. I mean, look, this is the joke. If the guy who wrote this actually cared to take a look at the war map on the thing that he's written and claiming that the Ukrainians are now going to push all the way down to Crimea. I mean, where is Crimea? It's not even on the map. Look. Oh, look at that. That says 20 kilometers. That says 10 miles. So this push, this successful breach of the line, so to speak, by the Ukrainians in Robotna looks quite limited. They've not breached beyond 10 miles, and they possibly at the top on the actual original battlefront, not pushed in terms of width more than 20 kilometers, bit more than 10 miles, and they're claiming that the Ukrainians are claiming that they can just get all the way down here. Well, we know now, months later, that's not happened, and we know that despite this being true, they did this breakthrough. It's not a major breakthrough because it's tiny, and they have had no gains since. So you tell me what you think of that. I know what I think of that. Again, messaging. Slow progress, which they're just making excuses for. There's reasons for that slow progress. They don't really know what they're doing, and the Russians do. Let's see what this says. I mean, it's ironic. The BBC's own war maps are questioning what the BBC reporters are saying. They claim they have breached formidable first line of defensive in the south. I mean, it's the same story. Yes, it's true. Little by little, I think we're gaining momentum. Well, you haven't gained anything since, so you haven't gained momentum. We are between the first and second defensive line. Don't explain what that is. That's really important. So basically, the Russians have created 3 lines, and the Ukrainians have to break through each of them to be successful. And they've only cut through one of the 3 here. So the issue is, are the Russians actually okay with that? And I think you could have a debate about that. But obviously, possibly the answer is, well, yeah, they may well be fine with you breaching one of the lines if they got 2 others. The fuck off war. Destroyed tank. Lots of pictures of destroyed tanks that actually were not being shown again. So this is the whole map. Like, you can't even see the progress. It's ridiculous. And ideally, they want to get somewhere here. So they've got to kind of do that maybe 100 times and keep going south, which is just ridiculous. No army's going to breach and just keep going south. They're going to have to go east and west. So yeah, I mean, jeez. I mean, this is, to me, so stupid. So stupid. UK, the US is coming on now. Sees notable progress. What progress? They pushed heavily against fortified Russian positions in the south. No, in truth, they broke on 1 line, and they haven't broken 2 other lines since they broke. I mean, where's this from? September. So September, August. It's now end of November when we're going through this. So it's like over a month and a half later. It had captured the village of Robotna. I would recommend all critics to shut up, come to Ukraine, and try to liberate 1 square centimetre by themselves. Yeah, so the Ukrainians are getting a bit miffed at what they're being told to do. But this is part of the narrative. And this is the further question then. This is not successful. Why is it not successful? There are very, very multiple reasons for this. But then the question is, out of those motives, how much is the NATO influence on being told what to do just because we've given them so much money and we've given them so many weapons, which is basically go use them, which is basically not go use them, fight on the battlefront and die. We didn't give you these for nothing, would be the spin on that. Why, what are you doing? Go on, march. And there's lots of actually criticisms. I mean, it's one of the things. It's like there's so much propaganda anyway, and it's like there's nothing about really kind of the tactics of the Ukrainians, what they're doing and why they're doing it, which isn't altogether the Ukrainians' fault. So a lot of it has to be. I mean, the whole failure. We've covered the failure. This is a failure from beginning to end because the Ukrainians are barely touched, but it's not all their fault. A lot of it has to go to NATO. And NATO has, it looks to it, said to them, now we have given you these, go use them, go die. They're probably between, it's different estimates. I would say 300,000 would be a conservative estimate of dead Ukrainians this year alone. Possibly 500,000 in total, if you believe other less conservative estimates. So in reality of the whole war, let's split it. Almost around the 400,000 mark. That's a lot of dead men, and that's not including dead Russians. I can tell you for a start, 400,000 Russians haven't died in this war, or we would know about it. So yeah, a lot of things going on, just like So that's the BBC's reporting on Robotna. So where do we find Robotna? I mean, this is about as rural as you can get. I mean, I grew up in the country. So it's a village. I grew up in villages. None of the villages I grew up in are as small as this. So, like, you've got, what was it? 3 major rows of houses with some other roads. So you've got a major road, 2, let's count them across, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 roads in the village. And there's only 1 road across. So this is not a big place. It's not a big deal. So let's imagine how the Ukrainians might have captured this. So we've got Novodanivka to the north, which I think would be it's going to be in Ukrainian territory. So these are the strongholds. Okay. Somewhat slightly bigger. So some force presence. Okay, this place here, whatever we call it, Orikiv. So this is the base of troops, let's imagine. They've got to send them to Robotna. What would be the distance? I can't see her. So about 25 kilometres, I'm reckoning. So marching here to here, here to here. So you've got several issues. So this is a war. This is why, if you want to fundamentally understand this war, because of what we've talked about, the fields, the places, the lack of major roads, it's logistics. It's not easy. So let's go back to some of these maps. So this isn't really what's been shown on these maps. The difficulties with the logistics. Because you've got, this is a rural agricultural country with a rural agricultural society. Places are not very big. There's not a lot of big places to hide lots of troops and tanks. The main roads are few and far between. As we said, so let's add the winter thing in. Some of these roads here in the country will be dirt roads. They're just like going to be impossible. So logistics is a massive problem. So what do you think the issue might be in Robotna for the Ukrainians? Anyway, summer or winter. Why do you think the Russians don't really care that much that the Ukrainians broke through their first line of defence? So the second line would be down here, if you can see, around these places, and then the third one will be a bit further down, somewhat. And that's something else to look at. That's another factor we're not even figuring in to this whole thing. So the answer is, logistically, this is a nightmare to maintain hold of. So the question is, should the Ukrainians gone in the first place? Possibly yes, if they were wanting to gain more. Should they have retreated once they couldn't gain more on the foothold that they gained? The answer is, I don't know. Possibly yes. So here you can see the main road. So there is no road here. So you've got a big problem. How do you... So logistics is two things. How do you resupply with troops? How do you, second thing, resupply troops with food? Thirdly, how do you resupply troops with ammunition? And then fourthly, how do you supply the front, with vehicles and weapons that aren't ammunition? So you've got to march them down a line here, which isn't a major road. You've got serious problems. You've got even more serious problems when you are surrounded by the Russians on the front line. So you can imagine the types of weapons that are lined up on these fronts that the Ukrainians cannot fire at, cannot attack, because they'd have to send them down, and they would be fired at by the Russians before they could basically dig in. So this basically fundamentally is a massive part just a logistical war of what is possible when. So as I said, we're turning to winter, so sending troops down, you're going to get bogged down. And you can see the major... Well, you can't really. I'm not even sure what these are. So you've got Verbova here. So this is an important place for the Ukrainians to gain. So if you entirely think strategically, the whole idea you just march south, it's like dumb. It's the mistake the Ukrainians have made in wanting to show. But basically this is the issue. Half the problem with the Ukrainians failing is they need to show progress. And to show progress, you actually have to have progress. So it's not strategically been fought in the right way. So what the Ukrainians should have done is, and what they switched their attention to, is, like you can see, they've gained a bit of land here, is Kopany and Nestorianka and Verbova. And while they were initially attacking Verbova somewhat, they weren't the other two until only very recently. So this is the strategical issue. The Ukrainians progress, they're completely outflanked by the Russians. So anything that gets put in this green square, green circle, whatever you want to call it, is going to get fired at by the Russians. So that's that war map. Let's have a look at this one. So there you go. You can see all the major places. So again, already you're looking. So this is called the Zaporozhye. Zaporozhye, I think. Sorry for my pronunciation. Apologise if you're Ukrainian. Region. And look, there's like 3 major places here, like 10 miles. So this is literally 100 miles. You've got 3 major cities in 100 miles. It is incredibly rural. So here you can see the roads a bit better. Somewhat. So this looks slightly different, but the same. So you can see how close Robotno is to the front line. So you're continually from the north, from here, trying to feed logistics into here just to survive, let alone attack. And you've got Russians lined up. I mean, look, you can see the blue, I think, is going to be... no, it's not a waterway. It doesn't say what the blue is. It says waterway, but I didn't know that, actually. So that may be why the Russians are even less fussed, because they've got a natural water division for the line, so they can fall back to Kopany quite happily if they wanted to. Oh, right, here we go. These straight lines are the... So you can see here the first line of defence here. So they've broken through. Barely. So the first line actually probably is more here. So why did the Ukrainians actually want to attack here? Because the first line defence isn't heavily defended. So this is the second and this is the third. You can see that it's broken up. So, I mean, this is some of the stuff we weren't going to get into because it's quite detailed. But the issue here is that the Russians can't have a line through the whole of the front line. It's just not possible. They don't have enough troops to man that line, so you need to defend the areas that need to be defended. So there are reasons the Russians, good or bad, would not have wanted to have a good line here. And the answer to that would be it's not great territory to take, so you don't need to heavily defend it. This is more heavily defended. Why is it more heavily defended? Because the Russians don't want you to break through this line. That's going to cause them a problem. This less. So the first line's been broken into, the second line's barely been touched. You've got a kind of in between a second secondary line around Verbova. And sorry, this area here. Then you've got Verbova. Then you've got another line. Then you've got another line. So down here, the Russians are saying they're not expecting the Ukrainians to get anywhere near breaking this line. And these are all heavily fortified and heavily defended and very hard to breach for lots of different reasons that we could go into, but we're not going to go into. We're probably doing another video. So when you look at it on the map, it looks far less impressive when you understand the nature of the land. It looks far less impressive. So you've got this one road running down into Robotna. So this is why there's no progress, because there can't be, which is why the Russians are happy to let the Ukrainians take these territory, because again they can just line up. So let's look at it a bit more on the actual Google map. So there's Robotna. So this is the road. So on that map, that war map, it's not saying it's a major road. So the Russians are here in Novobrokhovka, or whatever it's called, and the Ukrainians are here in Robotna. So as we said, this isn't a big place. This is not the best place to defend with putting loads of troops, because it's not big enough to have loads of troops. So on the west, we've got the front. So we said earlier, the strategy for the Ukrainians is to take the flanks to either side of Robotna, because basically the Russians can just stay here. Here's the river, and just on their own fronts, just fire tanks, missiles, mortars, send in drones, which is another issue. And just pepper them at will. So they've got to see something going on. So this is what they don't have any choice. The Ukrainians are sending the logistical stuff, those 4 things we talked about, down this road into Robotna. At this juncture, they are cutting across, and they're trying to get to Verbova. So if we look at there, so you can see some sort of road. It's not easy to see actually, but this looks like a dirt road. Yeah, quite possibly. Doesn't really matter if it is or isn't. So here we go. So they're having to cut across this field or this land. So they're not even on roads anymore to get to Verbova. So there's basically 2 lines of logistical supply in this area for the Ukrainians. So if you're the Russians, what you're going to do, you're just going to watch those areas of supply. Now this is the thing about drones. So drones have been entered into warfare, and you can basically buy a drone off Amazon. You can buy a drone off the internet. They are quite cheap. They're called FPV, which I can't remember what FPV means. First person view, that's what it means. So they've basically got cameras on. So how do you spy in wars now? You have a whole ton of drones. These drones are then adapted to fit to hold weapons, basically. The operator's got control, he flips the button, drops a grenade or drops ammunition, blows up. That's how, basically, fundamentally, this war actually is being fought, not with tanks and troops, but with drones, and adapting the drones and doing clever things with the drones. So, when we talk about drones and warfare, so there you go, military drones. So this is what we think are drones, this unmanned combat aerial vehicle. That's the classic, what I call Obama drone, because it's from the Obama era of the White House of American presidents. But these are the drones that are effective in wars. So you basically, I mean, it's obvious, like, you send a man in, or a helicopter or a tank to do something, you know, the issue is, you know, your drone gets shot down, no one dies. Drone gets shot down is cheaper. So actually, send in a tank and it gets shot at. Say no one dies. Tank. How much is the tank? You know, maybe quite a few £100,000. How much is a drone? Not as much. So you can see, in terms of strategical warfare now, it's much more effective to have better drones than better tanks, ironically. So what the Russians have actually been able to do is to buy drones, to get the right equipment from different people. So they've got Iranian drones. That's scary in itself for obvious reasons. Don't need to say why. The other war just said why. But the Russians have actually been really good at developing their own drones to do specific things. So there's a thing called the Lancet. And it's getting scary, actually, what they're doing with these drones now. So this is a Lancet drone. So they say this costs, I can't remember, it's no more than 50k, I think. And it's basically designed to just take out military vehicles. And it's very effective, and it's basically what you'd call a kamikaze drone. So it's one use. So the beauty of drones is they can be one use or multiple use. Multiple use, you fly them back to drone HQ, you go again. These are created just to take out military vehicles, including tanks and people carriers and stuff like that. But they're highly effective. So you've just got a drone operator flying into enemy territory, it just takes out a tank. Boom, boom, boom. So basically that's all the Western tanks gone, as well as the Ukrainian tanks. Crazy. Obviously that's an exaggeration, but it's just a exaggeration. So what you have here is, coming down this road, the Ukrainian logistics, and basically you've just got Russian drones of all sorts, including Lancers, just flying into everything that's come here. What probably ends up happening is that the Russians start laughing at the Ukrainians. And it explains why the Russians weren't really bothered to repel. So the Russians have this tactics, and actually I've heard a comment in one of the videos I've watched a while ago, actually, saying the Ukrainian soldiers, like, texting on social media channels quite a few times, different soldiers, like, getting frustrated with the Russians because they won't fight. So why won't they fight? Because they don't need to. Because the Ukrainians do this, the Russians counter them with drones, and eventually it just creates stalemate. So in Robotna there's a stalemate, they can't advance. when they try and attack, they just get hit by drones. And even sometimes they know the Russians, when they do retreat a bit, that the Ukrainians, because they don't really understand what's going on and don't understand what they're doing, and have this issue of like they just want to get some, oh look, we've captured this territory, so they do stupid things. Like, more often than not, if the Ukrainians take some territory and the Russians defeat, a day or two later the Russians would just bomb them, sometimes to oblivion, with drones and with tanks and with missiles, all sorts of different things. So it's not just the drones, but the drones are key to this, and then they will go and attack and take back the land, and then the Ukrainians will have to retreat. So it's this back and forth all the time. And this issue of like Ukrainians taking land is just like it's just not even the point, because of the nature of the war. So what you can see, open fields, one road in, one road out into Robotna. Very easy for the Russians to attack. So what the Ukrainians should have done is gone for this place and then this place from the north, and then they could attack it from the south. So basically, to attack, you need a wide front, so be able to attack from 2 or 3 places. So that's kind of Robotna. No, I don't think there's anything else to say. Just like there are basically dozens and dozens of tanks, probably hundreds of tanks in this area alone, apparently, because all the Ukrainians could do was send them down here or send them to Verbova. So some serious problems. Thinking about time. Quite enjoying doing this. Enjoying's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. So there's Avdiivka. See, it's really close to Donetsk. Doesn't have some of the issues Robotna has, but this isn't an area that the Russians have lost to the Ukrainians. It's the area they need to gain. So this is the hill they took. Actually, this is quite good. You can see the actual built-up bit of the city. So again, quite rural. There's Donetsk. There's Avdiivka. Or Avdiivka, one of the two. So this is the area the Russians are taking. So they're basically less than a kilometre, I would say. Well, yeah, they're a few hundred metres from the edge of the actual city. So the city's just about to be taken. So you've got massive logistical problems here, because if the Russians take this road and the front line is here, how do you retreat your troops from the front line? You can't, because you don't have the logistical road, and the other one is far away. So you've got some major problems. So I imagine quite a lot of Ukrainians are going to get captured here and have to surrender. And this is the actual city. This is what the Russians ultimately want. There's an industrial area here. So we didn't really talk about some issues. So we didn't talk about Ukrainian propaganda, but there's quite a lot of videos coming out here which aren't the worst things that Ukrainians are putting on social media channels in terms of propaganda, but like showing tunnels and stuff, and they're just actually natural tunnels because it's a very industrial area. There's like there's something there, I can't remember what they call it, but you can see these are rail tracks. So a coke plant, I think. Something like that. So if we go back to terrain. So what you can't see is hills actually on these. So this is a very hilly, so it's Stepova and Badici. So there we go. So this is the mound. It's like right across from the industrial, so you can see that actual plant. I think it is a coke plant. So very industrial area of this city. That's the residential area. And the Russians are coming up this road here. So they're here. So they're right on the edge of the city. So this is literally about to fall. This will be an absolute disaster. When the Ukrainians are trying to show that they've had progress, they lose the one place that they don't want to lose. And this is kind of inevitable. It's a matter of if and when. If we did a full report on this, from what we know, what's been reported, which might be propaganda, it's a complete disaster for the Ukrainians. So they've been kept out of the whole area through different methods. Difficult to take this, but it's been taken. Minefields in the fields. And it's the issue why it's not the war's not progressing on either side particularly quickly. It's because everything in the fields is mined pretty much. So when you get into a city, you're free to take the rest of the city. So that's the problem you've got. So what actually happened on the day Hamas launched their attack against Israel, and they actually said I think 1 or 2, maybe 3 days before it was Putin's birthday, and the Russian army wanted to give him a birthday present, so they attacked on multiple fronts. So the issue across the whole front actually with Divka is like they can't reinforce with troops and send troops into an area they need to defend, because then they'd lose those areas. And you've got kind of a real tricky situation. So I think they were saying originally 6 or 7 areas the Russians originally attacked, and you see in the map earlier 20, 21, 22 was it? The last few days. So around 20 on this front, east of the river. Here. The Dnieper River, or whatever it's called. So the third front here, where they're talking about progress for the Ukrainians, is across the river. So again, they're having to do the same thing. But you can tell straight away what's going on and why this is just a total disaster and why they shouldn't have done it in the first place. So again, what's going on? They just want to show progress. Oh, we've crossed the river, we've taken some Russian. And actually the Russians are having some problems here. But there's no way the Ukrainians are going to advance here for one obvious reason. How do you get machinery, particularly across the river? So the Russians have had particular problems. The Ukrainians have had lots of good advances here. So what they've been doing is putting men in boats, putting them again to cross the river in the different areas. You can see this is just tricky, and they've had success in having men, but they can't get anything more than men, so it's limited exactly what they can do. So part of the issue with now is the fog, because it's on a river. So today actually I saw a video released by the same guy, basically showing there's a whole bunch of stuff which is mostly propaganda put on different social networking sites, not the main ones actually, because they get taken down. But you've got action from both sides. So the other thing with the drones is recording the battles. So you can have a drone dropping a bomb, and you have a drone recording the drone dropping the bomb, and then it goes up on different sides. So actually this stuff's all been geolocated, hence you see the battlefront, hence you've got the videos on YouTube, hence why this actually is the best information, because it's because like no one's on the front really. It's actually, in terms of the whole war being not dominated, but being a large proportion of its control is by drone warfare, so to speak. It's like, it's the problem with reporting it really. It's like nothing can move without a drone spotting it. So if you want to move a tank, you want to put a missile, want to move a missile into a certain place, it's going to get spotted. And then the other side's going to send something to basically wipe it out, whatever it is. Actually, one of the things they trying to wipe out, which is critical, is like telecommunications towers. It's a bit crazy, like using different weapons to take out towers. So, I mean, there are multiple facets. So one of the issues for the Ukrainians is they've got these HIMARS missiles from the States, from the US, really expensive, but they're taking out towers and tanks with them, and missiles that are way off the front, because that's the only thing they can do at some points. Like, pretty much, I don't know how much a HIMARS would cost, but multi-billion pound missiles, American missiles taken out, was it a couple £100 military equipment in terms of like signal for a drone. So that's important because obviously signals fly, and there's a whole thing now actually about blocking the signals. It's obviously there anything that moves across the river. So why now? Because of fog. So what they have explained is there's certain areas inland. So Sedova, this place here, whatever it's called, this place here further up, where Ukrainian troops are boarding these ships and getting sent down here. So the video today I saw is like the Russians have pretty much fitted a whole bunch of their drones with night vision. So obviously the Ukrainians have been sending these at night, which has been successful, and now this is stopping because the Russians have gone, okay, right, well, we're going to make the expensive decision to put night vision on drones, even one-time drones. Why? Because it just stops the advance. It saves them a whole lot of bother and money and dead soldiers in the long term. So this is what's happening. So that's what the Ukrainians have been doing, getting men across in boats in foggy conditions and in night time with success. But it's limited to men, so there's only so much you can do with men, because men have to actually do what the Ukrainians want to do, they've got to keep progressing and fighting, and you can only fight men with men. If men's what you got, you can't fight tanks and stuff, because like it's impossible to get any machinery. It's particularly heavy across these bridges have all been blown up. So let's look at the routes. So you've got a route here. So what they're doing, the Ukrainians, is if we get into the area, where is it? I can't quite see it. But you see all this land. So the Ukrainians have been taking this land. It's pretty much pointless because there are so many rivers. So this is an old map, actually, I think. Do you know what's happened? When that dam went, yeah, and everyone blamed it on the Russians, and it's a bit 50-50 who did it, that this river would have flooded, and you've got a river path here. So, I think that's what's happened. So who then blew up the dam? Well, if that's true, I'd say the Ukrainians blew up their own dam, which isn't a surprise to me. So down here, it's definitely a river here, because I've seen it, into here, down here. And it's this landing area, roughly here, but this goes straight to here. So the Ukrainians have taken this small bit here, and that's all they've done. So the other issue is using the Viridia River. So I think there isn't. This river runs into this from here. So that's what the Ukrainians want to do, but they need to expand, capture down to here, and they haven't yet. They'd also ideally want to get this area here, in the Corker River here, and this area here. So I think they've got a very small patch of land around here somewhere. I don't know where it is. I think it's here, where they've just got a tiny foothold. So progress, yes, quite a lot, but actually it's easy to repel. Given you work out a strategy to repel it, even if the Russians couldn't repel it, which they haven't been able to up till recently, it's limited the progress the Ukrainians can make. So the Ukrainians are really making no progress whatsoever, and losing this war very badly. There's all sorts of lots of political issues, geopolitical issues, military issues. So one is, this isn't working, so why should anyone fund the money? You have to be a complete lunatic if you're a Western government, to keep sending money to the Ukrainians in the hope they actually do what they wanted to do in the first place. So why are they sending? Well, it seems to me we're sending money to the Ukrainians to continue a war, to just do whatever against Putin and the Russians, which they'll never win. And there's quite a lot of talk of NATO and the West, even the Americans, trying to influence the Ukrainians to parley for a ceasefire and a negotiated settlement for the war. Because the alternative is the Western countries have to keep funding the war, or there's no way the war will continue. If the Ukrainians run out of money, Putin can just basically march across the whole of Ukraine and just take it, and would not have much of a problem. So the only reason there is a battle and there is a front and there are fights and the Russians are not marching through the land is because of the money and it's not even the equipment, it's the money sent to the Ukrainians to fight. So I think they were saying 100 million per day is what the Ukrainians need to continue the fight. That's a large figure. It might be less, but it's not going to be half as much, is it? But let's just say it's 50 million. So you can imagine that after days and weeks and months, how much would this war cost if it were to finish at the end of next year? That the inevitability is the money's going to run out from the Western side to just prolong the war. So what's the point prolonging it? And that's the issue at the moment. Lots of things being reported that aren't reported on our mainstream news. So the interesting one, I don't know if you saw, is a report that a Ukrainian pilot took one of their planes and defected, took the plane into Russia. So the issue there is F-16s. So if F-16s get delivered to Ukraine, which they shouldn't because they have nuclear capability, if they have nuclear capability, a Ukrainian F-16 could not launch a nuclear into Russia if it wanted to. So what are the Russians going to do when there's an F-16 in the sky? They're going to do everything they can to shoot it down. It's a more dangerous kind of war because you're pushing the war to near nuclear and nuclear possibilities. It seems there's certainly Zelensky on the Ukrainian side's very happy to do that. The West would be insane to even have a conversation about it, though apparently we are, and apparently they were going to get some F-16s next year, which aren't going to be able to fly anyway, we've been told, are not really combat ready or combat worthy because they're 4 years old or something. Hey ho. I mean, everything about this war is just dumb, if you ask me. Certainly from the Ukrainian side and the Western side, it's beginning to look really quite dumb now. I think that's it. There's lots of facets to say actually what's going on, how is this happening here, how is that happening there, but that's the basic overview of the whole thing from my perspective.